Hello everyone, welcome to the session Discover, Assess Azure SQL Readiness of SQL Server Data Estate at Scale using Azure Migrate service. And my name is Pochiraju and I'm a Principal Program Manager in Azure SQL Group at Microsoft. My core focus is to develop and product manage the various migration and modernization tools that really help you to take a seamless database migration to Azure SQL. So in today's session, we are briefly going to talk about the various deployment options that are available in Azure SQL. And then we are going to be talking about the different phases in the migration journey. And then we are going to be deep diving into the specific tools and services that you can really leverage to take that migration journey. And then we will have some deep dive demos as well as part of that. So first things are the first. Let's examine the various deployment options that are available in the Azure SQL. And think about Azure SQL is a family of fully managed, secure, and intelligent SQL deployment option that is available on the Azure. And then Azure really offers a widest range of deployment options, starting from your on-premises SQL Server and the edge to the cloud. And then within the Azure itself, you have various deployment options depending on your migration needs and as well as the modernization needs. Starting from SQL servers which are running on the VMs, and these environments are best fit for simply lift and shifting your existing SQL servers to the Azure SQL VMs, so that you can really get the same operating system and as well as the same SQL Server versions to it. And then you will have a full control at the OS level as well, in case if your workloads requires a complete access to your OS level and as well as the SQL Server. You can migrate to the SQL servers which are running on the VM. And on the SQL platform as a service, we have a couple of options. The very first one is Azure SQL Managed Instance, which really provides close to 100% compatibility with your on-premises environment, so that you can really migrate and modernize your workloads with very, very minimal effort to begin with. And then if you're looking for developing a new application, a cloud native application on the Azure, the best option is to use the Azure SQL database, and it also has the options like serverless, and as well as more importantly, it also has options that can really scale with unlimited resources. We call that as a hyperscale storage. And then because the Azure SQL is also built upon same SQL Server engine, you can really migrate applications with ease and continue to use the same tools, same languages, and same language frameworks. So you don't need to learn something new to be familiar with Azure SQL environments. So that's the whole advantage that you get. Then the next question comes, when to use which SQL offering to begin with. It all depends on how much control that your workloads really need to manage your servers and as well as manage your SQL Server, and what type of capabilities that you are really needing to. In case if you really want to manage the entire system as a whole, including the operating system updates, disaster recovery aspects, high availability aspects, you completely want to manage it, or you want to have a complete access to your operating system, and then your workloads are dependent on a specific SQL Server version, or you want to manage and control when you want to really patch your operating system and as well as the SQL Server, and then if applications and as well as your database servers and other services really need to be co-locate, then your option is to migrate to SQL servers which are running on the VMs. But whereas if you want Microsoft to manage your disaster recovery, your high availability, your patch updates, so that you can really focus more on your application and workload development, then your best bet is or you want to have a complete your workloads are dependent on some of the SQL Server related features like SQL agent jobs and as well as cross database reference queries, then your option is going to go to the Azure SQL Managed Instance. But whereas if you want to have Microsoft to fully manage your SQL Server databases as a service, and basically your workloads are contained to use a specific database or database scoped workload that you are really trying to develop, then you can really use the Azure SQL database as a as a choice. So these are the various choices that are available, and then this slide really help you to pick the right Azure SQL deployment option that really good fit for your workloads. Once you pick the specific deployment option that you want to migrate, then the next question is, how does the migration journey is going to look like? And that's where we are going to go deep dive into this session. First, let's examine the various phases that are there in the migration journey. There are, think about migrations is a journey, and obviously the journey has multiple phases. And the very first phase is the discover and assess. So this phase really involves getting an inventory of all your database servers, application servers, find out those dependencies and how ready these applications are migrating to Azure, and more importantly, which applications are really the ones that you want to really prioritize, and then what it would really cost when you really migrate to Azure SQL or Azure, any of the Azure services. How does this current architecture is going to map when you really migrate to the Azure? All that analysis happens during the discovery and assessment phase, and then once you have discovery and assessment phase, it really gives you a plan to really prioritize your migrations, and then you can really migrate those assets in various different types of migration phases. To help you into the discovery and assessment phase, we have a service called Azure Migrate, fully managed service, which is available on the Azure for no cost to the customers. You can really leverage that service to go and then get an inventory of your assets, do and then discovery, find out all the dependencies, and then get recommendations in terms of what deployment options. Remember we talked about various deployment options in the previous slide. So this tool really help you to find out which deployment option is good fit for your Azure SQL workloads, based on your compatibility and as well as based on your features that are currently in use. Then it will provide a recommendation, and it also provides how much it really costs when you really migrate. It really gives you estimates and cost estimates, and those estimates are going to cater to some of the licensing benefits that you are bringing into the cloud. And the next step is to really migrate, and that involves migrating your schemas, migrating your databases, migrating any other artifacts like SQL agent jobs, SSIS packages kind of stuff. And then you can really use our Azure Migration service for doing those migrations. And then we are going to go deep dive into both Azure Migrate and as well as the new experiences that we really built to help you to do the database migrations with very minimal migration downtime, near zero migration downtime. And then once you get to the cloud, then the next step is to really optimize your resources, how these resources are being used, and how much are really costing to you. Can you downgrade, or do you need to scale more? You can really have those cost optimizations by leveraging our Azure Cost Management service. And then obviously the secure and manage. Obviously secure and manage is not something that you think about at the end of the migration journey. Security is something that part of your migration journey since from the very beginning itself. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that Azure provides a lot of security features and native cloud services that you can really leverage to secure your environment, and also a lot of services that really help you to manage those services as well. So that's kind of a complete migration journey that you can see. And then we also have programs that really help you to take the complex migration journey as well, like fast track, and there are some engineering white glove experiences as well that we can really help you to unblock your complex migrations. So with that, we're going to be going deep dive into a couple of migration scenarios. Essentially, I can divide these scenarios into two specific categories. So if your SQL servers are running in a VMware environment, if in the on-premises, if SQL servers are hosted on VMware servers, we're going to deep examine into the specific tools that really help you to take the migration journey that we talked in the previous slide. And then if SQL servers are not being hosted on the VMware environment, if they are in physical servers or bare metal, and then or if they are hosted on Hyper-V, or if they are in any other clouds like AWS and Google Cloud, then we will take a little different approach in terms of discovery and assessment, and as well as the migration. So these are the two specific scenarios that we are going to be going deep dive. And at first we are going to be talking about the scenario when your SQL servers are running on the VMware environment. Remember, let's connect back to our migration journey. The very first step when it comes to the migration journey is to be able to go and then discover your SQL servers and find out how ready those SQL servers are, which deployment options that we can go and migrate, and how much that would cost. All that analysis that you can really get from our Azure Migrate service. And think about Azure Migrate service is a central hub or a one-stop shop that really meets all your migration needs. And it also provides a unified migration experience across multiple scenarios, like migrating Windows servers or Linux servers, or migrating your database servers, or migrating your web applications. It really provides a unified experience for all those scenarios that we are talking about. And then you can really use this service to centrally visualize your entire migration status to begin with. Whether you are migrating servers or databases, this is a single place that you can really keep track of all your migrations, right? So we're going to go deep dive demo into that. So for that reason, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, even before I go to the demo, because we're going to be using Azure Migrate very extensively, and I want to take a few minutes here to explain how this whole thing works. For instance, if you see, as you see here, you have SQL servers which are running on the VMware environment, and then our goal is that we are going to be discovering them and as well as assessing them using the Azure Migrate service. So that's the goal. For doing that, what we need to do is at first you need to create a project in the Azure Migrate service, which we are going to see in our demo how to do that. And then you need to download an appliance software. And that appliance software is going to be getting installed in the on-premises environment. So the appliance software will have both the discovery components and as well as the assessment components as well. So you're going to be installing that at first in your on-premises data center, and that will really the entry point for that appliance to probe your servers is through the vCenter. So you need to provide a VMware vCenter credentials to the appliance, so that appliance know that it can go to the vCenter metadata database and then find out all those servers, which servers have Windows on it, which servers have Linux on it, which servers have SQL servers on it. So it can really get all that information, and then it will go and then connect to the individual servers remotely, and then get all the deeper insights that it required to complete the discovery and as well as to do the assessments, right? That's how it actually works. So the point here is that you don't have to install anything on your actual SQL servers to begin with. You just need a appliance in your on-premises environment which can remotely go and then connect to all those servers. So think about this is more of an agentless way of discovering and assessing your SQL servers. And as part of the assessment, we collect a lot of performance data to really measure the performance of your existing workload in terms of your CPU, in terms of your memory utilization, in terms of your disk IO, or in terms of your IO requirements to begin with, or IOPS that are really required to run your workloads efficiently on the Azure SQL targets, right? So we collect all that information. You can really configure how long that we need to capture that performance data, depending on starting from 1 day to all the way up to 1 month. Typically, our customers really collect around 6 days or a week to get the actual performance profile of your source environment, right? And then we also get the configuration information. We look for the compatibility aspects of it. So we really look at a lot of data, and then we process that, and then we really provide a very comprehensive reports in terms of what Microsoft Azure Migrate is recommending you to go to a specific deployment option. And then it also gives you the cost estimates for those deployment options. And then it can also apply all the licensing benefits, like AHAB benefits and everything that you are bringing into the cloud as well. So it has very comprehensive reporting functionality that I'm going to show you as well. So that's how Azure Migrate really works. So with that, let's go to the demo. At first, we need to start using Azure Migrate. So for that reason, I logged into the portal, the Azure portal, And then at first we need to locate Azure Migrate. So if you do Azure Migrate service used, then you will find out the Azure Migrate service on the dashboard, but otherwise just type for Azure Migrate. And then you will get to Azure Migrate service here. As I mentioned, Azure Migrate is a fully managed service on the Azure, free of cost, and it also provides a unified migration experience across your servers and as well as the databases. That's where you see all the web apps and then as well as the servers information as well. So at first my goal is to do the discovery of the discovery of my server. So I'm going to click on discover and assess. You see here, this is the Azure Migrate dashboard, and then because I already did a discovery and assessment as part of this demo, you will see that some of this discovery data is already here, but otherwise the very first step is that you need to create a project at first. The way that you create project is, let me show you how to create the project here. It involves very simple steps actually. At first what you're going to be doing is you need to select a subscription where you really want to create your Azure Migrate project, and then either create a new resource group or pick an existing resource group where you want to have Azure Migrate to keep all those resources in place. And then you can also give a project name so that you can identify that project, and then specific region. That's it, pretty much, right? Once you create the project, the next step is that you're going to click on the discover functionality here, and then now you need to tell whether you are going to use the appliance that we talked about, or you're going to import some of the servers that you might have got an inventory through a different means that you can really provide through CSV files. For now I'm going to choose appliance here, and then you also tell where exactly your SQL servers are hosted, whether it is a VMware or whether it is Hyper-V or it is a physical server or some other cloud. So I'm going to choose VMware for this scenario. Then it will give you simple 4 steps that you need to configure the discovery, right? At first you need to generate a project key which you are going to use when you configure the appliance. Then you need to migrate the appliance software. Remember, the appliance software is going to remotely connect to your servers and then get all that insights that are required for discovery and assessment. There are 2 ways to do that. One way is that we will give you a .vova file that you can really use that file to think about that is a template file that you can really use that to provision a VM in your VMware environment, which contains all these software components that are required for discovery and assessment. Or if you already have a server, you can really simply download the zip file which you need to install your software for the discovery and as well as assessment. And then you need to set up an appliance. So once you have this .voa file and then the VM is up and running, the appliance VM is up and running, the next step is you log on to that VM and then configure the appliance. So this is the appliance console, where at first it is going to check all the requirements and everything, and you need to register the Azure Migrate appliance here. Remember the project key that you generated in the previous step, that you simply want to use it here so that this appliance knows that it needs to communicate with that migration project. And then you log in, and then you need to provide a vCenter credentials. Remember, the entry point for VMware is the vCenter, so you need to really provide those vCenter credentials that it can really leverage to connect to the vCenter. And also you need to provide, for the deeper discovery, you still need to provide the server credentials of the SQL servers and other servers, either Windows accounts or SQL accounts. You can really provide them. And then in case if you use multiple logins for multiple servers, you can really provide all those multiple logins in a given list, so that we can really map which login. We can map automatically which login works for which server, and then we're going to keep using of those. So those are the pretty basic steps that you need to do to configure your appliance, and then you hit start discovery. Once you hit the start discovery, then you go back to the discovery here dashboard. It will start showing the information that is there for you. So now that I already discovered there are 65 servers And within that 65 servers, there are at least 51 servers that are hosting SQL Server on it. So I'm going to double click on those SQL servers to begin with, and then it takes me to much more deeper inventory data that we collected actually. So it has all those servers listed here, and then you can even collect the software inventory in a very detailed view actually. It really pulls all the processes that are running on a given server, all the programs that are running on the server, and more important, including the SQL Server and .NET components. And then it also pulls all the roles and features that are installed in the server. So this is a very comprehensive inventory information that you can really get out of that server. And then you can also see that the specific SQL Server instances that are installed, and then it also gives you the profile in terms of memory, CPU, the disk profile, and also gives you the operating system information and everything, right? So for example, I want to really examine the specific server that has 5 SQL Server instances on it. So I can double click on that in SQL instances to get into the more details of the SQL Server. So on this particular server, there are 5 instances, and for each instance, it really gives you a SQL version and as well as the edition, and it also gives you the number of user databases, and then it also gives you the total size of those DBs, whether failover cluster is installed or availability groups is configured for your high availability needs. It gets all those details for you. You can further click on databases as well, so that it can really take you to the deeper insights of the databases, in respect of their size, and more importantly, their compatibility levels, and then the status of those databases, how they are in. So all this information really help you to plan accordingly, right? Which of those servers that you want to migrate. And once the discovery is done, the next step is to assess the readiness of those ones. So for doing that, you need to create an assessment at first. So you go to the assessment here. There are other assessments that are also provided, like Azure VMs, Azure SQL, and as well as the assessment for apps in case if you are migrating your application servers. But for now, I'm going to click on Azure SQL to begin with. And then it's pretty simple. By default, we provide you some properties for assessment, but otherwise you can really change those properties to customize your assessment results as well. For example, you could say that I'm going to be applying the reserved capacity. If you already buy licenses ahead, you can do that. Or by default, Azure Migrate really recommend you to which SQL deployment option that you can really migrate to. But if you have some preference that your organization made a decision that I always wants to migrate to MI, then you can override that option as well. And then you can also bring whether you want us to apply the hybrid benefits or not, so that when we estimate those costs, then we can really apply those license benefits as well. So you can fine tune this assessment a little bit, but otherwise this is pretty simple. You just provide these options and then we just create an assessment in the next step. Once the assessment is created, you can start looking at the assessment results here. So I want to go a little deep into those assessment results as well. For example, I choose this assessment, and this assessment has a summary view to begin with, and it really gives you the servers, the number of SQL instances, and number of user databases that are being assessed. And then it also gives you, more importantly, how Microsoft Azure Migrate is recommending you to migrate to a specific deployment option based on your compatibility levels, based on your feature set. It really gives you that recommendations to you, so that you don't need to really worry about, hey, am I going to migrate to VM? Am I going to migrate to MI? Which options are good fit for you. It really recommends you what it is, what we think that is the best option for you. So it gives you segregation. Out of all these instances, 89 are ready to go to MI, and we are not recommending to migrate SQL DB for this particular data center, but there are 6 SQL instances we think that you should migrate to the VM. So once you go with these recommendations, then here we provide you the cost estimates, how much it really going to cost for all these SQL instances to migrate to Azure for various deployment options that we recommended to you, by applying the licensing benefits as well. So let me click on to, I want to go more deep into SQL Server instances, because if I'm a DBA, I'm care about the few SQL instances that I manage, then I really want to go deep dive into those SQL instances as well. Yeah. For example, here the very first row, there are 20 user databases exist, and this particular instance is ready for both SQL DB and as well as ready for MI, but Microsoft is recommending you to go to Azure SQL MI. The reason is that when it is ready for both deployment options, then we look at the specific SKUs in both deployment options, and then which can render the similar performance as you need to run your workload. And then we compare the cost of SKUs in MI and as well as in SQL DB, and whichever comes less cost for you, then we recommend that SKU for you. So basically, without compromising your performance needs, without compromising your high availability needs, we look for a SKU that really offer similar profile, but at the same time it is less expensive for you. So that way it is really recommending SQL MI as a target here. In this case it's an express edition. If it is not ready for one option, then obviously the choice is to go to MI. But if you really want to understand why it is not ready to go to Azure SQL database to begin with, you can really click on that. It will take you to the specific details why we think that it is not ready. So there are around one issue at least. So you look for a specific database that has an issue. For example, Northwind, where it uses a service broker feature, which is not supported in the SQL DB, but service broker is fully supported on the managed instance. So that's the reason you don't really find any issues with the managed instance, but you only find a migration issue with SQL DB. Then it also gives you warnings. They're not migration blockers, but something that you might want to take a look at it. If required, you need to fix after the migration is done. In this case, there are some trace flags are enabled on your on-premises. So look at the functionality that really help that trace flag and see if you really require that kind of a functionality when you migrate to the Azure SQL as well, right? So that way you can really understand, not only that we recommend what we want to go, but also if you really want to look for other options, why it is not ready for a specific deployment option, you can get more details. And more importantly, you can get to the mitigation steps as well, so that you can really fix them in case if your preference is that. So that how this report really help you to do these migrations to begin with. And then further more, once if you double click on the cost aspects of it, then you can double click on each individual SQL instance, how much it costs. Also you can really get that information as well. So that way you can really get a summary view, but also you can deep dive into specific set of SQL instances that you want to really examine, right? That's how Azure Migrate really help you to make those kind of decisions for you. So I'm going to go back to my slide deck. So we talked about the Azure. Now we go to the next step, actually, how to migrate. So far we have seen how to assess, but now how to migrate, right? So we recently released a new extension called SQL Migration Extension into a tool called Azure Data Studio that really help you to do a seamless database migration with near zero downtime to both SQL VMs and as well as the SQL MI as a target. And then because it is kind of integrated into a tool, Azure Data Studio, which you might already familiar with it to manage your on-premises assets and as well as the cloud assets, without giving an ability that you can launch migrations from the Azure Data Studio, makes it much easy your migration journey. So we released that aspect into Data Studio. And briefly how it works is that obviously you need to have a Data Studio, a mission where you launch your Data Studio. It can be your laptop as well. And then this migration extension leverages the ADF integration runtime. ADF developed this workflow where it really help you to provide a robust data transfer from your on-premises environment to the cloud, and then also robust mechanism to copy your database files to Azure. So that we kind of leverage that technology for us. And then you need to provide so the extension uses the backup and restore technology to do the migration. So you need to provide all the full backups and as well as the log backups. We use log backups to apply the incremental changes. That way you will really get a minimal downtime migration experience. So provide all those log backups and then everything into SMB network share, so that we can really upload those backup files to the blob storage. So the service itself uploads those backup files to the blob storage, and then it starts installing the full backup at first, and then start applying the log backups as they come into the SMB network share, and then that process really continues. So right, and then that's how you're really going to establish a migration, initial migration at first. And when you're ready to do the actual migration cutover, you stop that process is explained here. You stop all the incoming traffic that is coming into to the SQL servers, and then you take a final log backup and provide that log backup into SMB network share, so that we go and then restore that final backup as well. Then at that point of time, you just simply switch. Once the cutover is done, you simply switch your connection string from your on-premises environment to the target SQL database that you just migrated either to the VM or MI. So that process is as simple as that actually, right? So let's see the demo actually, how that really works. So for that, I'm going to be logging into my demo environment. So give me a second there. Okay, here we go. I logged into the environment that where I want to show the demo, and then this is the Azure Data Studio that you are seeing it. And as you might observe, when I connect to my source SQL Server, my goal is to migrate the databases from the source SQL Server to Azure Managed Instance in this case, right? I see that there is an extension. At first, you need to install the extension. Once you install the extension, you will see that in here, Azure Migrate SQL. And the experience is pretty simple actually. You just click on that, and then it has few steps actually. At first, if you already logged into the Azure, then it picks up that account. So you log into the Azure portal, and then it already connected to your on-premises on-premises SQL Server instance, and then identified all these databases to begin with. And then I'm going to simply select all those databases with the intent that I want to migrate, and then it is making a quick assessment to assess your existing workload to understand which of these deployment options that these databases are ready to migrate, whether Azure SQL Managed Instance or whether you want to migrate to the VMs. So it really did a quick assessment actually, how quick it is. It's telling you that 3 out of 8 databases are ready to migrate to the Managed Instance, whereas 8 out of 8 databases are migrated to the VM. So in case if you want to migrate the entire instance as a whole, your choice is to migrate to the VM, because there seems to be some databases have some migration blockers migrating to the Managed Instance. But if you want to really pick and choose, whichever databases are ready to migrate to Managed Instance, you go to Managed Instance, but otherwise you can migrate to the VMs, or you can mitigate them a little bit later to make sure that they're still ready for Managed Instance. You can do all that exercise. But if you really want to understand why those 3 databases are not ready, so HR seems to has some kind of a compatibility issues, but you can always address those compatibility issues when you after the migration done. But I think multiple log files is one which is marked as not ready for migrating to the Managed Instance, and it is because that it has multiple log files. So by default, when you use backup and restore, you cannot really restore a database with multiple log files to a Managed Instance, because Managed Instance only supports a single log backup, right? So then it also provides you a mitigation step how to do that, right? So that's how you can really make a decision which of these databases are ready to migrate or not. But for now, what I'm going to be choosing is I'm going to choose HR database that I want to migrate, even though it has few issues in terms of the compatibility, and then there is I can always fix those issues after the migration is done or as part of the migration journey. So I'm going to click that one, and then what you need to do is you need to pick a subscription where your target Managed Instance exists. So I'm going to pick a subscription here. And then you also select a region where you want to really create where the Managed Instance already exists, and then a resource group here. And you see that it already picked up a Managed Instance here, so I'm going to choose that. And then in the next step, it is really asking you to choose an option whether you want to do an online migration with minimal downtime that happens only during the cutover, or if you want to do an offline migration where your migration downtime starts from the time that you start your migration here. So if you're doing a simple POC and test migration, you can always choose offline migration. But otherwise, if you're doing a production migration, we would recommend you to choose online migration so that you don't impact your business to begin with. And my backups are in the network share. So I need to provide first of all, I need to provide a source credentials. And then I also need to provide a network share where I can really, kept my database backup files. So I'm going to do that. This is my source server. I created a network share there, name as backup, right? And then I also need to give a so this user is Windows account, that is the data studio is going to impersonate that account to access the backup files that are in this share and then upload to the blob storage. So my database name is HR. I'm going to put a new name to it. I have a feeling that I already have the database. And then you need to pick up a storage account where you want the migration service to upload the backup files to the blob storage from which it is going to restore to the managed instance. So I'm going to choose a resource group on my name, and then this is the storage account. It's already picked up, which is good. And then now I need to pick up a migration service. So in case if you have the migration service, you can pick from here, but otherwise you can create a new one. So I already created a service, so I'm going to choose the resource group where my service exists, and now it is double checking whether the service is healthy or not. So I go to the next step. I just hit summary button, right? You just verify everything is good, and then you just start a migration by doing done, right? What I'm going to be doing is I'm not going to start this because I already created one for us. So I'm going to cancel this whole thing, and then there is one migration is already in place here. So I'm going to double click on that, and as you might see here, this migration is currently in progress. So I got all the full backups and as well as the log backups that are supplied in a blob in a assembly network share, and all these backup files are uploaded to the Azure blob storage and also restored to the managed instance, right? So this is all good. The migration is in progress. It is all good. Once you're ready to do the migration cutover, as I talked in my previous slide, you need to take the final log backup and then provide that in that particular share. So I created this share. You provide that in that share, and then it will upload and then it will restore. As soon as that backup is also restored here, you can simply call a migration cutover, right? It is really going to make sure that it is, so it is also telling you that the number of log backups pending are 0, which is good. You want to make sure that otherwise, if there are any pending log backups that are not restored then if you call the migration cutover, you might end up with losing some data. So you want to make sure that you confirm it and then click complete cutover. With that, simply it is going to really bring the database online, right? So that's the process involved. So if you recollect, the migration downtime only happens in the last phase, which we call that as a cutover phase, where whatever the time it takes to stop all the incoming traffic to your applications, take the final log backup, whatever the time it takes to do so, upload and restore. So that is the only time your migration downtime. We have seen a lot of customers, even for very large DBs, they kind of be able to migrate the databases within like 15 minutes of downtime. So we can achieve that. I'm not calling the cutover for now. I'm just going to cancel it, but that's how the whole experience is. So now, so far what we saw is, I'm going to go back to my slide deck here a little. Now, so far what we have seen is, we looked into this particular scenario where SQL servers which are running on the VMware. Now we're going to be focusing more on SQL servers which are running on non-VMware environment, whether it could be bare metal, Hyper-V, or whether they're running it in a different clouds like AWS and GC2, or GCP, I'm sorry. Then the process looks a little different, where we did not have the complete unified discovery and assessment experience that you have seen in the Azure Migrate. Is not supported yet for physical servers and other environments. That support is going to come pretty soon. But meanwhile, what you can do is we can use our DMA tool, Data Migration Assistant tool, to assess and then upload that information to the Azure Migrate to get the summary view, how ready your estate is migrating to Azure SQL. And then you can use the same database migration tools to migrate as well. So in this case, I'm going to showcase, you can use today the SQL Migration Extension and ADS will only support the target SQL Server, which is running on SQL VMs and as well as managed instance, but it doesn't support the migrations to the SQL DB yet. The support is going to come pretty soon, but for now, we can use our Azure Database Migration Service to do a migration to a SQL database that you are seeing here. So we're going to use DMA and Azure Migrate combination for assessment, and we're going to use the DMS service to do a migration from on-premises environment to Azure SQL database, single database, right? So that's the set that we are going to be doing it right now. So let me switch to my demo environment to showcase that scenario as well, and give me a second. Okay, I got into my demo environment. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be assessing our databases at first, and then we need to, once the database is ready to migrate to Azure SQL database, then the next step is that we need to do a schema migration at first, because we are going to be using a logical way of migrating data from SQL Server to Azure SQL DB single database, as we cannot use backup and restore technology as opposed to what we did in the previous demo, right? And then I'm going to use the DMS service to do the actual migration, right? So that's the briefly, that's how it's going to look like. So DMA is a fully, DMA is a freely downloadable tool that you can really download from Microsoft Download Center. Once you download that, when you launch it, it's pretty simple actually. So you're going to click one of these plus signs, and then you want to do an assessment here, give a project name, and then choose SQL Server. In this case, we want to migrate as a source, and in this case, we want to migrate to Azure SQL database as a target. So I'm going to create a project for that, and then it does two things. One is check database compatibility, so that it is going to look at all your compatibilities of aspects of your stored procedures, triggers, and all that stuff, to see how ready they are migrating to Azure SQL, or if any of those objects needs to be mitigated today, right? So that's kind of thing that it does. And it also does the feature parity check. It looks at all the instance level features and then see how ready those features are migrating to Azure SQL. So it gives you that comprehensive information. And pretty much in the next step, you just give which server that you want to assess, and then select the specific set of databases that you want to assess, add. And if you want to assess more SQL servers, you can do that as well. Like that way you can do it through scale. And then you choose another server, and then you just do it. And then once that is done, you just hit the start assessment button. So what I'm going to be doing is, I'm not going to be performing an assessment now. Instead, I'm going to use an existing assessment that I already did an assessment. So I'm going to open that assessment. And as you see here, there are some feature parity issues, that there is some file stream functionality has been used, and that file stream is not currently supported on in the Azure SQL database and as well as in the managed instance. So if you are really dependent, your workload is dependent on that feature, then you might want to migrate to the SQL VM. But whereas the other server, also another server has multiple log files that cannot be migrated to the MI, but that can easily be migrated to the SQL DB. And let me look at the compatibility issues as well. So for example, the HR database here has got some stored procedures that are reported that they're kind of using non-ANSI joins. So you can still migrate to Azure SQL database, but when you use this stored procedure, or when you execute the stored procedure, it is going to break. So that's the reason that you want to fix that stored procedure. Identifying the specific databases which are ready to go to Azure SQL DB or not, using the DMA tool with this approach is useful when you are dealing with few number of databases, one or two SQL instances and few number of databases. But imagine that you have hundreds of SQL Server instances, thousands of SQL Server databases, and you really need to have a summary kind of view, especially when those SQL servers are hosted on physical servers and other environments which are not on the VMware. Then what you can do is you can assess as many SQL servers as you want using the DMA like this, and then you can start uploading these results to Azure Migrate project using the upload to Azure Migrate button, which you see on the top right bottom corner of the DMA tool. And then you just need to connect to the Azure portal using your credentials, and then you need to pick a subscription ID and the Azure Migrate project where you want to upload these results. And then Azure Migrate collects all these assessment reports that are coming from the multiple DMAs, and then consolidate all those results to you. So let's take a look at it, how that consolidation is going to look like for us. So I go to Azure Migrate service again, and then this is we saw Azure Migrate, how it helped in the VMware environment. But now for non-VMware, you need to choose this option, SQL Server's only option, instead of using this one. So I choose that, And then this is how the summary report is going to look like once you upload all those results. So it gives you the assessed number of SQL Server instances, and then for each of the instance, how ready these instances migrate into Azure SQL. Some of them are 100% ready, and some of them are only ready for a less than 100% ready kind of stuff. So if you look at our SQL Server here, then it is not 100% ready, is because one of those databases, which is ArchiveDB, which is not ready for migrating to SQL DB, but otherwise all other databases, including our HR database that we are going to be migrating, is also ready, right? So that way you can really find out. And then you can also find out at individual DB levels. You can also access them into this report as well, which will tell you, whether HR is not ready or not. And in this case, it is ready for SQL DB. So our goal is to migrate this database to SQL database. But before we migrate, we also need to understand what would be the SKU size that is going to be really good fit for this particular database to migrate to the Azure SQL, so that you don't really run into any performance issues or any high availability issues, that kind of stuff, right? For that reason, in the past with the VMware environment, we used Azure Migrate for doing all this stuff. But for non-VMware, then we should relay back to the DMA, Database Migration Assistant tool, that really gives you the SKU recommendations. So this is the document that really explains how this whole process works actually, right? Three steps. One is you need to collect the performance data from your source SQL servers, whichever time that you want, really, whichever duration that you really want, using a command line option, right? The guidance is properly divided here, which requires a configuration file, actually, config.json file that you provide as an input to the DMA to do the database performance collection. So the action that you are asking DMA to do is the perf data collection, and then there are a number of SQL instances here. So in case if you really want to assess the SKU for multiple SQL servers, you just need to list out all those ones, and then provide an output folder where all these performance data that is being collected is going to be stored, right? Once that performance data is collected, the next step is that you need to give that as an input to DMA again to really assess those performance data, right? So we used perf data collection as a command for that, and then to get the actual SKU recommendations, you're going to use the command let SQL assessment.exe, and then this time you're going to say the action is going to be get SKU recommendations. In the previous we did action is get performance data collection, but this time you're going to get the SKU recommendations and provide the same output folder where the previous command collected all the performance data. The output of that is going to look like similar to this. So it will do the analysis of all your performance data and then really provide the actual recommendations that really help you to create a proper SKU that really help you to render the similar performance that your workload is required. And then more importantly, not only that it provides you SKU, it also provides you a justification why we think that that specific SKU recommended is a good fit for your workload. So that way you can really find out whether database is ready or not. If it is ready, what would be my SKU that I need to really migrate to. So I can use this information to provision my SQL Server database on the Azure SQL before I start my migration. We migrate my HR database to the SQL database, right? For that reason, remember I told you we still use Azure Data Migration Assistant tool to do the schema migration at first. So I'm going to go here, click plus here. This time I'm going to choose migration as my project because I'm migrating my schema. So migrate schema and then SQL database, and there are a couple of options here. You can just do a schema only migration or schema and data. For small databases, you can still use DMA to migrate both schema and as well as the data. But otherwise, if your database is large, I would want you to use the Azure Database Migration Service, which I'm going to demo you for more comprehensive migration experience. So for now, I'm going to choose comprehensive and more reliable migration experience. So I'm going to choose schema only here. And then you just select the specific source and then connect to it. I'm sorry. And then pick HR, or you can pick other databases as well. And then you select the target where I already provisioned my database. And then I'm going to use that database on the Azure to actually connect, right? and I'm going to choose HR here, and then I'm going to the next step. At first, it is really assessing your HR database at first to make sure that the schema is ready to migrate to the Azure SQL, and then it will generate a schema, and then you can really deploy that schema. So to just save the time here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the interface here, which it already assessed, and as well as even if you go back to a previous tab, right, it assessed it, and then it really identified all those tables that are exist in a source database, and then if there is any issue exists, it is also going to pinpoint that this particular table has some issue, which is using the text and image columns which are deprecated, not removed, just deprecated. You can still continue to use them, but the recommendation here is not to use for any new development that you're doing, right? Generally, Microsoft is not willing to have any more deprecated features or deprecate any features to begin with, unless they really pose a security or privacy threat. So going forward, you don't really see a lot of these issues, but for now, this is the deprecated issues. It is not removed. It will still support on the Azure SQL DB. It's just that you don't want to use it for the new development, right? So I'm good with it. So you can choose all those tables, and then functions that you want to migrate. It will list out all the triggers, and as well as any other database objects that you might want to migrate as part of your schema. It will list all of them, and then you simply hit a generate schema. So then it will come up with the schema for you for all the objects that you just selected in the previous screen. You just simply deploy those schemas onto the Azure SQL database. As you see, the schema is ready for us. All you do is you just deploy the schema so that it will go and then deploy the schema onto the target SQL database that you just selected. So as simple as that. So at first you select your source database, then the DMA tool go and assess and then identify all the objects. It also pinpoint the specific objects that might have issues that you need to fix it, and then it generates the schema for the selected objects that you selected. So that way you can really select the specific objects that you really need, and then you have an ability to update some of these or make changes to some of these objects as well, as they are compatible with Azure SQL DB, and then deploy it. It will not change your schema on the source environment. It only deploys onto the target SQL DB. Or you can really simply save this to a .SQL file. Later you can really integrate this .SQL file into your change mechanism systems to really make the schema changes over there. But then once you deploy it, the next step is to migrate. So for migrating, you're going to be using our Azure Migrate service to do that. So let me go back to my portal here. Azure Database Migration Service is a fully managed service on the Azure, just like how Azure Migrate is. It helps you to migrate your databases from on-premises SQL Server to the managed instance SQL DB and as well as SQL VMs. But now we are going to be using this service to do the actual database migration. So I'm going to click on this category. At first, you need to create your service. The create service experience is pretty simple actually. Let me go to that quickly. So you click on the create button. You select a specific subscription where you want to create your database migration service and provide the resource groups, and also give the service name, specific region, and then also select the specific SKU, standard and premium. Standard is the one which provide a migration experience that requires a little bit more downtime because it's an offline migration. But if you want to really the online migration experience, you can choose premium as well. So that's pretty much it actually. So you choose one of those and then apply, and then you just go to the network where it requires to have a site-to-site connectivity between on-premises and cloud. So you need to choose a specific network gateway that has either ExpressRoute or VPN or point-to-site VPN, something that you need to really choose. Right now I'm not seeing any virtual networks here for that particular region, but otherwise it will list out all those network that are available that you can really choose, and then you just hit a create button. Usually creating a service will take around 8 to 12 minutes. So I kind of used my existing DMS migration service that I already got, and then then what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to create a migration project here, and that experience is going to look like this. So I'm going to click data migration, and then at first you need to provide the source information. So I'm going to use, now DMS is trying to connect to the source SQL servers. Now it picked up all the databases that are there, and it also gives you the estimated downtime that might incur while you are migrating this database from on-premises to Azure SQL database. So depending on how much it says, sometimes if this downtime is not acceptable for your SLA, migration SLAs, then if you really need an optimized migration experience, you can always contact us at dmsfeedback@microsoft.com, so that we can really help you to come up with an optimal migration downtime experience that really fit for your workloads. But for now, 1 hour, that's fine for me. So I'm going to go to the target here, and I provide target credentials there. And then in the next tab, I pick a specific database that I want to migrate. Like I said, you can pick all the databases that you want to migrate as well, so that you can really migrate the entire SQL Server instance as a whole. But then you also need to map the specific target database on the logical server that you provided in the previous tab. If the database names matches, then you can simply we auto map the database for you. But if the databases are not same name, then you need to pick from that list. So it's going to pull all the databases that exist on the logical SQL DB server, and then I'm going to choose HR as my thing. And then you can also have an option where if you want to set your source database as a read-only mode, so that you can avoid all the upcoming transactions that are coming into the source in server, because remember that downtime starts from now, right? So you can do that as well. And then you go to the next tab. Yeah, in the next step is it really puts all the tables that exist in the source, and it will give you an option to select the specific table that you want to migrate, so that you can do a selective migrations as well. For example, it says that these are the tables are not empty. That means I might have migrated them already, but I can also choose them so that it is going to refresh. It's going to delete all the rows that exist on the target, and then it's going to override that, right? So I choose that option. But there are a bunch of tables that exist in the source, but they're not there in the target database, because when we do the schema deployment, maybe we skipped those tables, so that those tables does not exist on the target. That way you cannot really migrate, right? So I'm going to go to next step here, and then give a name. So Rajpo demo, and then you simply hit start migration. It will take you to the migration experience there. It's going to read all the data that exists on your source environment, and then start pulling the data from your source tables, and then inserting into the target environment. So if you double click on that, you will start seeing some of those tables, right? Some of those tables are already completed actually, right? So that's how you can really use our DMS service to migrate to the Azure SQL database, single database, right? So with that, I'm going to conclude all my demos, but I want to recap what we actually did in terms of the demo. So I'm going to go back to this slide. So at first we really focused on SQL servers which are running on the VMware environment. We used our Azure Migrate service to discover and as well as to assess, and then we used our SQL Migration Extension in Azure Data Studio powered by Azure Database Migration Service to migrate your SQL servers to a managed instance. The same capability or extension that you can also leverage to migrate to SQL servers which are running on the VMs as well. That's one set of demos that we did. And then what we did is we come back to the SQL servers which are not running on the VMware environment, but instead they might be running in the physical servers, bare metal, Hyper-V, or as a matter of fact, they might be running SQL servers on the virtual machines in Azure as well. Or they might be running in other clouds like AWS and Google Cloud. Then we use a little bit different experience to assess and as well as to migrate. So for assessing, we use the DMA tool and we upload that information to Azure Migrate service, right? And then we got the summary view there. And then we use the Azure Database Migration Service to do the actual migration of your database. So that's how this experience is going to look like to begin with. With that, I'm going to conclude this demo by providing some resources to you. These resources that you can really leverage to learn more about Azure SQL. And then we have an Azure Migration Database Migration Guide that really help you to assess or understand how the migration journey is going to look like for various source and target pairs. And then we also have a link for you, aka link, that really help you to understand and learn more about Azure Migrate service as well. With that, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to conclude this session, and I will see you next time. Thank you.